Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guest is none other than Mr. Jim Nichols. Jim has been involved in UFO research for over 30 years. He is a prolific writer, posting 21 blog essays on his website as he explores the political and social impact of a possible extraterrestrial reality. He has produced an extraordinary body of UFO art that has since been published internationally in magazines, articles, books, and the internet. His art was routinely featured on the History Channel's UFO Hunters. Jim is also the winner of 2 EBE-Awards at the 2010 International UFO Conference in Laughlin, Nevada, for his video documentary about Nazi saucers entitled The Aldebaran Mystery. Following this conference, Jim has produced numerous videos for UFOTV, which are now posted on YouTube. Our discussion was wide-ranging, with Jim giving his perspectives on Nazi technology, the ongoing role of secret societies in the occult within the space program, and what is it going to take for humanity to break free from the shackles of the engineered oppression which we have all been subjected to for thousands of years. My first question to Jim was how he ventured into researching the esoteric orders like Thule and Vril, and how these occult societies played a role in the development of highly advanced Nazi technology. Let's take a listen.
Well, you have to go back to my other video that I did prior to that, which is called UFOs Reconsidered, and I wrote this, oh God, way back. I knew Wendell Stevens many, many years ago, way back in 1980, and I followed a lot of his research. So and then I read a book by Genesis by W.A. Harbinson. Have you ever heard of that book?
I have not.
Okay, this was a novel, actually a novel that came out back in 1980 called Genesis. It was written by a British author named W.A. Harbinson. And this was the first time I'd ever heard of Nazi saucers. And the whole theme of his book was that flying saucer technology was developed during the war and survived the war. And it's a very compelling novel because it contains it's just crammed to the rafters with serious actual documentation. And up to that point, I'd never heard of the idea of Nazi saucers. So anyway, I started to kind of research into it and so forth. And I was very interested in the conventional propulsion technology saucers that were being developed by Nazis like Rudolf Schriever and his Flying Top. And these were circular flying machines that were powered with conventional turbojet engines at the time. And I just kind of let it go at that. And then, a few years later, I was invited to do an interview, a video interview with Wendell Stevens, again, about this topic. And Wendell broached this incredible story about the Vril Society and the ladies of the Vril, Maria Orsic and so forth. These German ladies who, prior to World War II, allegedly made telepathic contact with a whole extraterrestrial group from the Taurus constellation called Aldebaran, and that this other whole story of anti-gravity technology and so forth kind of spun out of that. And so I went back and redid a second video, a second story, a second body of research, which became the Aldebaran Mystery, which covers the whole, Vril Society and the Thule Society and the secret societies that prior to World War II were allegedly working on much more exotic anti-gravity technologies.
Yeah, it was very well made. What I enjoyed about the video was I had read pieces here and pieces there, and then you had come out with that video essay, and it just kind of brought all the pieces together. So it was very fascinating. And I do realize at the end of it, you state that we really can't verify any of this.
Right.
But as you mentioned before we actually got started here, the advent of the flying saucer since that time has exponentially increased.
Right.
Now, with the Vril Society, you had mentioned that they were channeling the Taurus constellation and Aldebaran.
Yes. Well, Aldebaran is a star, and there's a planet that orbits that star, and there is a humanoid civilization there And you kind of, if you read between the lines, it sounds like this civilization actually may have been involved with Sumeria centuries ago. So that the Aldebarans were familiar with planet Earth and the goings on here, and there was also a tradition in the Teutonic Templars, the ancient Templars going back to the 13th century, that they claimed also to have contact with these beings from Aldebaran. So this was part of the deep, deep Nazi secret society mythology also.
Okay, and then the channeling that was coming back to the Vril ladies, the writings, they were actually, I guess, automatic writing, for lack of a better term, and it was coming through in ancient Sumerian. Is that correct?
Yes. The ladies themselves couldn't decipher it. They were just channeling these sigils or symbols or whatever you want to call them. But there were also members of the Vril Society who were Oriental scholars, and they recognized the writing as ancient Sumerian, and I think and also ancient Templar script. So they were able to read it. And apparently embedded within this information were descriptions on how to make anti-gravity flying machines.
This actually connects back to the ancient Sanskrit that talk about the ancient Vimanas.
Vimanas, exactly, right.
So it's kind of interesting, you know, we can kind of call this myth or, you know, this is not real and so on, but it just seems to me that over time, these things keep popping up, and especially for those people that do the research, you can connect the dots.
Well, there's some serious dots to be connected here, because in the ancient Indian manuscripts where they're describing the Vimanas, they specifically state that mercury is used in the propulsion system. Now you can track this on up to the Nazi Bell Project, and which has much more verification, or there's more of a paper trail with the Bell Project, and they specifically stated that yes, they were using mercury plasma to create counter-rotating energy fields that were powering the bell.
Right.
That the bell, and that when the bell was functioning, it could levitate.
And we would call this zero-point energy or anti-gravity energy?
Exactly, right.
Okay. So the Nazis, at least conceptually, were heavily involved in very, very advanced technology.
Absolutely.
Did they ever use that technology during World War II?
This gets very interesting. You would think they would have, right? You would think that they were accessing this technology to help them win World War II, but this is the paradox. It's like, and I know Wendell Stevens always talked about this. He said that they would develop an exotic propulsion system, they would test it, and then they would crate it up and ship it out of Germany as fast as they could. Rather than to deploy it as a weapon for the war, it's like there was a whole other agenda, this whole mysterious agenda that seemed to have a much more long-term focus than just winning the European war. And then you see, and I said, well, it makes no sense. It's like, well, you know, my God, if you got technology, I mean, for crying out loud, they had the Horton brothers had developed the Flying Wing, which is the first supersonic stealth aircraft, and they didn't deploy it. I mean, they could have knocked out all the radar units there along the east coast of Britain. They could have decimated the British Air Force. They could have whipped the Brits, you know, like overnight practically. Right. With the use of these supersonic aircraft. But did they deploy them? No. There's so much of World War II, and especially German technology and its development and its deployment, that makes no sense. The other thing is the Germans had a working, according to Joe Farrell, it's like the Germans had a working atomic bomb in 1944.
Right, I had read about that also, yes.
And it's like, well, wait a minute. It's like, what? But did they want to win this war, or were they planning for an even bigger war down the road somewhere? And that's where this whole thing just kind of goes off into a fog.
I guess you can make an argument that what was going on was a breakaway civilization.
Absolutely, yes.
You know, so they were looking at what was going on here, and this was really not, and you have to excuse the pun, not on their radar.
Right.
It's like, okay, we've got bigger things that we're working on, and this is not one of them.
And, you know, for those of us who've been, you know, our heads have been in the UFO issue for so long. We always see the German, flying discs as the end all and be all of anti-gravity technology. But it's like, no, that would have been just a sideline. Yeah, see, we can make flying discs, so what? It's like there's other bigger things that we can do with this energy source. We can make a weapon that would be like Star Wars. You could wipe out a planet with it.
Right.
It's like their obsession was like, okay, we have this technology and we can make flying discs with it, but that's not the end game. It's something much, much bigger, something more powerful, and something that would be literally world dominating once we have a handle on that technology. And it's interesting that of course, we captured von Braun and all the rocket scientists at Peenemünde, and we sent them all to White Sands and so forth, and that became the United States rocket technology program.
Right.
Lock, stock, and barrel. But the Bell Project, all the technology, all the scientists, and all the people that were involved with that just simply vanished.
Exactly. And that's very mysterious. Where did they all go?
Yeah, in April of 1945, the Vril ladies and General Hans Kammler, who was head of all the secret military projects in the Third Reich, they all just vanished.
Right.
Where'd they go?
There's two schools of thought on that, right? One says that maybe they went back to Aldebaran. The other one says that they have an Antarctica base.
Or they went to Argentina.
Or they went to Argentina, right. Okay.
Or they went to Argentina.
Do you believe, Jim, that there was an underground base in the Arctic?
Well, I think it was as early as 1943, the Germans were announcing publicly that they fully intended to create a colony in Antarctica. It was in their tabloids that they planned to do this. And then the head of the Kriegsmarine, the Navy, Admiral Dönitz, claimed very proudly that they had developed a citadel at the South Pole that the Fuhrer would be proud of.
Right.
So it's like, some researchers say that was just a lot of hoo-ha bravado. But frankly, I think take him at his word. I think that's exactly what he did. And we've discovered, since then that there are huge, gigantic caverns underneath the Antarctic where you could put a whole city.
Yeah.
You could easily put a city. And at that point in the war, the Nazis were developing hardened submarine pens in Norway. So it's like, well, what's the difference? If you can do it in Norway, you can certainly do it in the Antarctic just as easily, and maybe with more secrecy. So it's like, no, I don't put anything past these people.
Well, also, aren't both the North and South Poles no-fly zones?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so.
Yeah, I think so. Somebody has to ask, well, at least I'm going to ask why that is, why it is no-fly zones right over the poles. Now, the other thing, too, is to lend credence to the fact that maybe the Nazis had something down in Antarctica would be Admiral Byrd. Yes. And his trip down to the South Pole that didn't turn out so well.
That's an amazing story, and it's just, it's such an enigma. They claim that there was, they were engaging, there was like military engagement with, flying disc, or at least aircraft that were much more advanced than what we had. But if you look at have you ever seen the documentary, The Secret Land?
I don't think so.
Mike, you got to see this. You can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
MGM produced a documentary all about Admiral Byrd's, expedition to the South Pole. In fact, I think it won an Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1948, which it shows the whole expedition down to the South Pole in 1947. But if you look carefully, the aircraft carrier that they took down there, you see no combat aircraft at all. I said they had the R-4D Explorer planes. I think there was like 6 or 7 of them they had on the deck there on the aircraft carrier, and they had big seaplanes. But there's no evidence at all in that documentary of combat aircraft, and yet they described incidents that sounded like combat when they engaged these unknown flying machines at the South Pole. But anyway, of course, the famous quote from Admiral Byrd is that they encountered sophisticated aircraft that were able to fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds.
Right.
And it's that if we were facing another war, it's like this is the kind of technology that we would be up against. So it's like, well, is that Nazi saucers? Or is he talking about the flying wings, the Horton brothers flying wings, which were supersonic? It's such an enigma, and we don't really know. There's so much mythology that has sprung up around that. But what is real interesting, and I don't know, have you read Admiral Byrd's diary, where he claims that his last flight over the pole, he was literally abducted by flying saucers.
Yep.
Okay, and they took his plane into an underground facility there, and he met with the underground beings at the South Pole.
Right.
For 3 hours. Well, this is real interesting because if you look at the MGM documentary on Byrd's last flight over the pole, it shows that he had engine trouble, and he was in fact 3 hours late getting back to the base. So it's like you can read into that whatever you want to read into it. But okay. Well, either way, there was 3 hours missing time in that last flight.
Well, to me, Jim, something was going on because with all that and after the war, there was the whole Project Paperclip.
Mm-hmm.
There was something that the Allies were after. I mean, this is my view, my personal view, based upon my research, that if the Nazis did not have some semblance of technology that was deemed as advanced,
mm-hmm.
they would not have been going after scientists and bringing them in for the rocket program, and Wernher von Braun really was NASA.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about underground bases in Antarctica. We're talking about Nazi technology, the Vril Society, and all of these things. And it comes to a point, it's either just a tremendously elaborate hoax or myth or whatever it may be, or there's got to be some semblance of reality that's embedded in it.
Well, that's what's so interesting. But if we might digress a little bit more on Admiral Byrd.
Sure.
You realize he was a 33rd degree Freemason.
Yes.
In 1938, when the Nazis first went to the Antarctic, Admiral Byrd was invited to join that expedition. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. The first Nazi expedition to the South Pole, where they claimed that province for New Schwabenland for Germany, that was formerly Norway. Admiral Byrd was invited to go on that expedition, and he declined. So when you start to put the pieces together, what you have is like the German projects were being foisted or being promoted by the SS, by the secret society within Germany. Okay, and Admiral Byrd was interested in the South Pole for the Freemasons. So you have these two very esoteric secret societies that have a profound interest in the South Pole.
Right.
Is there a deeper story here? And is Admiral Byrd, is his interest in the Antarctic the fact that they think that the Antarctic may actually, in fact, be Atlantis? Or there may be Atlantean technologies that are hidden down there? And is that the same reason the Germans were going there? So you have these two competing secret societies, but then you ask, well, were they really competing? The fact that they invited Admiral Byrd to go on their expedition to the South Pole? It's like, is there a much more deeper esoteric story behind all this that would be held in the deepest secrecy by these secret societies?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting too, Jim, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but the whole hollow earth theory.
Mm-hmm.
How do I say this? They treat the rest of the population as the profane. They don't know anything.
Right.
They shouldn't know anything. So something is going on there. So when you start talking about the esoteric secret societies and even getting into the occult, who knows? They're not spending time and energy and money because they just have nothing to do.
Right.
So I've been reading a lot more too and getting into more discussions about the whole subterranean aspect of the planet. Do you have a perspective on that?
I don't buy the hollow earth theory. I don't believe the earth is just a big hollow basketball. However, I do believe that there are huge caverns, maybe cavern systems, maybe natural, maybe man-made, or maybe extra-terrestrial made, that go deep into the earth. I buy that. I think that's totally believable.
Okay.
So, and that you could hide a whole civilization down there? Yeah, for sure you could. Especially if they have access to these, highly advanced technologies. that the German secret societies and even the American secret societies fully believed existed down there. Is there a race? I mean, you look at Indiana Jones and all that funny Hollywood stuff.
Right.
Was there actually a race amongst all the secret societies to rediscover the ancient technologies and the ancient arcane technologies of ancient civilizations that flourished on this planet, like at the time of the Vimanas of ancient India? Are those stories of ancient civilizations and ancient super advanced technologies that there may be remnants all over the planet and inside the planet that competing world powers would desperately want to get their hands on?
Yeah, and for the audience that's listening and maybe scoffing at the fact that there's subterranean types of existences, I would just point to, Jim, the deep underground military bases.
Of course.
That we have. I mean, and
of course.
Right? But the thing is, many people don't even know about that. If you try to explain to them that we have these underground bases and they go for miles and miles and miles. I've read research where the thinking is that it goes from coast to coast.
Exactly, right. That you can. I've heard stories that they have bullet trains that can go, like from Los Angeles to New York, and just a matter of hours.
Yeah, it's amazing,
Yeah.
So the fact that there were ancient civilizations, advanced civilizations that were doing the same thing or similar or more in a more advanced way, I don't find that far-fetched at all, to be honest.
Oh, of course not. And then you look at how advanced the Germans were during World War II. And, of course, even during World War II, they didn't have these atomic boring machines that could just melt their way, across the continent. But the Germans were fantastic in developing underground factories and so forth. They said that they had working factories in Germany during World War II, and the Allied armies with their tanks and their soldiers were rolling right over the top of these underground facilities, and the Allies had no clue what was just beneath their feet.
Right. And the thing too is the Germans admitted that they had received help from other worlds, other entities.
Right.
I mean, maybe somebody could say that that's disinformation, but if you take a look at where technology was, let's just start with World War I, and then take a look at how technology advanced through the Second World War, especially within Germany. Something happened.
Right. Of course, that's kind of a cagey comment that, we are helped by beings from other worlds, and of course you immediately assume they mean extraterrestrial.
Right.
But now if you factor in the occult and people like Aleister Crowley, it's like he was also contacting beings from other worlds, but they were probably hyperdimensional demons and not extraterrestrials. So it's like, okay, well, this goes in all different directions.
It does go in all directions, and you can't discount it. A lot of people just want to chalk Aleister Crowley up as a black magician and not worth wasting your time on. But, the thing is, he was extremely influential.
Well, he was influential with British intelligence, and he was also heavily influential with Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, as well as NASA.
Yes.
So it's like, well, if this guy's a crackpot, why are these agencies taking him so deadly serious?
Exactly. Jack Parsons, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
What are your thoughts about the origins of NASA and leading into the Apollo missions?
This is so huge. And this is my most recent blog and my most recent video, which is called The Aeon of Horus and NASA's Occult History. And, I've been interested in exopolitics and so forth ever since 1980, which is the exploration of the possible reality of extraterrestrial intelligence and our interaction with it. And I must say that predominantly, up until, the last year actually, I haven't even factored in this whole aspect of the occult until I stumbled onto this story about Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley and their involvement in the development of NASA and our National Space Administration and the Apollo missions, and how much occult influence there is just in the project to land on the moon.
Right.
So it puts the whole thing of exopolitics, it just kicks it into a cocked hat where you just got to start all over again. and say, well, are we dealing with extraterrestrials? Are we dealing with hyperdimensionals? Are we dealing with aliens? Are we dealing with demons? What the devil is going on here? And why would NASA, why would somebody like Jack Parsons, who was the founder of the Jet Propulsion Lab, who was developing solid fuel rockets, back during the beginnings of World War II, why would they be taking all this occult stuff so seriously?
Yeah.
So it's like it just puts it all into a totally different dimension.
Well, the secret societies are completely submerged in the occult. A lot of folks don't even know what a secret society is.
If you want to take a fast and dirty look at secret societies, I suggest you read Dan Brown's book, The Lost Symbol, which is a real quick, very thorough overview of Freemasonry here in the United States. And it's like it's shocking. It's like how pervasive Freemasonry is in our entire American culture, and people have not a clue how much occult influence there is just within the fabric of our own country.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, this country was founded by the Freemasons.
Absolutely.
And there's no doubt about it. And folks want to debate that it's a Christian country and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, those that were creating were not Christians. They were Masons.
They were Freemasons, absolutely. And, Washington, D.C. itself is like an open-air Freemason temple.
Oh, yeah.
All the stuff, the Washington Monument, the Capitol building, the way the streets are laid out is just one giant, Freemasonic exposition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think they have a statue of Albert Pike.
Oh, okay. Well, Albert Pike was a convicted traitor from the Civil War, Confederate general, professed Satanist, and guess where he's buried? Well, if you look at the Scottish Rite Temple, it looks like a mausoleum. Well, guess what? It is a mausoleum because that's where Albert Pike is buried.
Right.
He's interred there. So that's like, what? This huge building is this huge celebration of Luciferian Freemason Albert Pike.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really unbelievable. It really is.
Yeah. And it's hidden in plain sight.
And it's all around us today. And I mean, not to digress, but if you take a look at their sigils and all of their symbols, it's all over the place today. Whereas before it was kind of hidden in plain sight. Today it's all coming out on TV shows and in music award programs and so on. So they're really, really bringing it out full force.
You can't have a Super Bowl anymore without having a huge Luciferian ceremony at the halftime, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like, what is going on here?
Right.
So yeah, it's everywhere and it's in your face, and people most of the public's just clueless about the whole thing.
Right. I mean, it's like blood ritual at halftime. Stay tuned.
Right.
Now, did we actually land on the moon? My view is that we did go to the moon, but what we were shown back home was not what was going on when they got there. So I just wanted to get your perspective on it.
From the research I've done, whatever happened on the moon was very likely a very, very highly advanced secret society project. And if you understand that at the highest levels of secret societies, it's like the general public is not allowed to know what happens there, very simply. And this, if you recall the words of Albert Pike, he said the truth must be kept secret, and the masses need a teaching proportioned to their imperfect reason. So that tells me that whatever happened on the moon, we will never be allowed to know. And that was for the highest level of secret societies, for their edification only. And so if that means, we'll fake a moon landing for the general public,
right?
But the real stuff we're doing on the moon, the public will never ever be allowed to know. That's how I look at it.
Do you think it's possible, Jim, that 1969 was not the first time that they were on the moon, that they had been making visits and travels there beforehand and still going there? I mean, it just seems to me they went there in 69, and then For 40 years, they just decided it's no sense going there anymore or doing anything with it. It's just a big gray rock floating around. Everybody, there's nothing to see here. Let's go home. It's hard to kind of buy into that story.
Well, this is where we have to roll things back to the Nazis again. At the end of World War II, you had Martin Bormann and General Hans Kammler. They were the power in Nazi Germany, not Adolf Hitler. Hitler had been shunted off to the sidelines, and the real power brokers in Nazi Germany at the end of the war were Martin Bormann and General Hans Kammler. And they were cutting deals with the United States. They were cutting deals with the Russians, the United States, the Brits, everybody. So it's perfectly conceivable to me. And then you look at Paperclip, where, of course, we walked away with Wernher von Braun and his entire rocket team. So it's perfectly conceivable to me that we had also gained super advanced spaceflight technologies as well. So advanced that they would never, ever be available to the general public. So we'll put on this big facade of a rocket program, while at the same time we're doing top secret, very likely free energy kind of propulsion systems.
Right.
Where it's like, if you read Behold a Pale Horse with Bill Cooper, he says as early as 1963 we were on Mars.
Yes, right.
So it's like, okay, well, it's like there's, it's like Albert Pike said, there's the stuff you share with the general public, while the real important stuff is going on in absolute secrecy.
Now, are you familiar with Project Serpo?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What's your take on Project Serpo? Because I read the book. I found it extremely, it was very interesting, and it kept my attention. I mean, I didn't put it out of the realm of possibility. I just was wondering what your thoughts are on Serpo.
You're referring to personnel exchange between the Zeta Reticulans and the Air Force?
Exactly. Yep, that's it.
Okay, I think it's interesting. I tend to take with a grain of salt as very likely a sophisticated disinfo. It may have happened, but you put it in the broader context of the whole alien perception that is being sold to the American public. I'm very skeptical about it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That's fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
If we go back to the moon for a second, Jim,
Sure.
Is your perspective that we have bases there, or have we been told you can come to visit, but you can't stick around? What do you think really went on there?
Actually, I think that's a better question for Richard Dolan.
Okay.
And his breakaway civilization. It's like, if we have, I think we have literally, there's another civilization that has evolved from the military-industrial complex since World War II. And if they have had access to even a fraction of these technologies, like the Bell or anti-gravity flying technology and so forth, imagine where that technology is now.
Yeah.
And these are technologies that advance exponentially every year. So they could be hundreds, they could be 500 years in advance of what we understand here terrestrially, especially, if the Earth, if the general population is being dumbed down exponentially, there's no telling where this has gone. I mean, have you seen the movie, the film with Matt Damon, where they had Elysium? Have you seen Elysium?
Yes.
Where you have the super society that's living on a space station orbiting the planet, where the whole planet itself has been reduced to sub-third world country status. And the super elite, live, like gods on a space station that's orbiting the planet. It's like that, to me, was like, that's pretty close to what I think Richard Dolan is talking about with breakaway civilization. So do we have bases on Mars? Do we have a whole fleet, out in space? Solar Warden, they talk about Solar Warden and the space fleet. There are personnel rosters for ships within the Navy, and the ships don't even exist. I said, well, where are they, in outer space?
Yeah.
So, you can use your imagination and just, go any direction you want with this.
Well, it's even with all of the satellites and everything else they're sending up into orbit.
Right.
Nobody ever really asks, what are they doing with all that stuff? They're not sending it up there because they have idle time on their hands and they just want to send stuff up into orbit.
Right.
There's rhyme and reason as to why that stuff is being deployed.
Sure.
Now, Jim, you got into, in your interview with Sophia, and I found it to be very, very intriguing, was the whole aspect of the occult and how, through the occult knowledge and magic, that there is this manipulation. This is my understanding of where you were going with this, a manipulation of consciousness. And by being able to manipulate that consciousness, that those that are the adepts, they could pretty much steer the ship any place they'd like to go.
That's the whole purpose of getting into the occult.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of the occult, whether it's the Kabbalah or whatever, is to have mastery. And I think this goes back to the Germans, this goes back to the Freemasons, and it goes all the way back to this ancient civilization that may have existed, long before the biblical flood. They were obsessed with mastery over time, space itself. They wanted to engage techniques or technologies that would literally give them absolute control over the unified field or fundamental reality as we understand it. That's the ultimate purpose of the occult. You could literally manifest any reality you wanted through the use of this technology and this power.
And I think the point that I'm trying to get across to the audience as we're discussing this is the fact that to get them acclimated, or at least start to think that things aren't as they appear, that when we're talking about the occult, we're talking about hidden knowledge that you're not supposed to know about, that they are knee-deep in, I would say, well, beyond their knees, up to their heads in. And they're spending all of their time 24/7 looking to figure out how to manipulate existence to their advantage. And to our disadvantage. They care about us. One of the theories that I had put out there was that September 11th, what that was a huge shift in consciousness. In other words, in order to nudge existence in a direction that the elites wanted to push it in, they needed to be able to redirect the consciousness from a global perspective. 9/11 was that type of event. It was a worldwide event. So when all of the consciousness and the focus went in that direction, which includes all the fear, because fear is a huge piece of this, that then, even if it's very subtle, redefined existence. That's what I've kind of seen since September 11th. I don't think there's really any argument that it has gotten exponentially worse from a control matrix perspective since 9/11 and where people's heads are at with regard to how they view the world.
A lot of people have kind of poo-pooed and scoffed the whole 2012 thing with the world didn't come to an end on December 21st, 2012.
Right.
But I think that maybe looking back, if you look at the behavior of the cabal and the powers that be, since then, it indicates that maybe there is a huge shift in consciousness that is happening. That is, that people are waking up en masse.
Yeah.
One of the things about ancient alchemy and ancient astronomy and esoteric teachings and so forth, they understand profoundly how changes, astrological changes, can affect the aggregate of human population. And the ancients have always stated that, the time will come when humans will wake up. Well, if the occult cabal, the secret societies know that this is coming, that they know something is coming that's going to break their power hold over the population of this planet, they can at least try to mitigate or to block that dynamic energy shift that is coming, that is not coming, it's literally happening now. And it's like, I think that's where you see things like 9/11, this obsession with the powers that be. It's like they're pulling out all the stops to maintain their control here, because I think they see their control is literally slipping through their fingers. So it's like you see it's more of a desperation.
Right.
9/11 didn't work. Well, let's try this. Let's try that. Let's try Ebola. Let's try to start a third world war with Syria. And it's all these absurd things, and it's like none of them seem to be working. Oh, well, we'll try chemtrails. Well, we'll try HARP. We'll throw whatever it takes into the mix to stop people from waking up, because if they wake up, we are no longer in control.
I agree that what they're doing is pulling out all the stops to try to retain their control. I mean, because they've been rewarded by this system. So if the system changes, they're no longer rewarded. They're no longer in power. And It's tough to fall from the top of the mountain.
It
it's,
is.
it's a
It is.
long way down.
And, you know, the secret societies have had it really so good for so long because human consciousness has always been kind of a constant for millennia. It's like you can pull the same old tricks for them, and they always fall for the same trick, right? And it's like, well, you can kind of sit back, this is, you know, it's no big effort. We'll do this and we'll do that, and we'll always keep them under our thumb. But now it's like, well, no matter what we do, so they're slipping out from our control.
Yeah.
And it's like, so, you know, the powers that be, I think, are in total panic mode right now.
Well, good. We have to keep the pressure on them.
Yeah.
Now, Jim, on UFOs in general, the questions always come up, oh, that's just our technology. That's our government with advanced technology. They are ET craft. They are terrestrial craft, but not humans. Or you had mentioned before, other dimensional types of beings. Do you have an assessment on where you might be at with all that today?
Well, you know, I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up with all the wonderful science fiction movies of the 50s.
Yeah.
And I just loved that idea of, you know, extraterrestrials coming here and so forth. And I think, you know, maybe, especially after we set off the atomic bombs, that maybe, you know, extraterrestrials were concerned about what the little monkeys are doing on this planet because they're playing with some nasty toys now.
Yeah.
So I think at that point in time that maybe there were a significant number of extraterrestrials. But also, if you look at the mindset of our own military, our own government, it was like, well, if some extraterrestrial shows up in a flying saucer, and we don't have a flying saucer, it's going to be like the Manhattan Project. It's like, well, we have to have a crash program to match this technology, right? So I think there has been that kind of research has been in the works for a long time. But the beauty of it is that, well, it's like as long as we don't tell the public, as long as the public doesn't know, and as long as we keep feeding the public these wonderful science fiction movies that shows the aliens from outer space, we can fly our own stuff here with total impunity, whenever and wherever we want, and just say, oh, no, it's swamp gas. You know? It's the planet Venus. It's like, you know, it's a flock of seagulls, you know. And it's like, and you could, you know, the government, you know, if you kind of dig into the research and into, you know, some of the people within the CIA and so forth at that time, that's exactly what they said. They said, we can fly this stuff with total impunity as long as the public doesn't know, and we can just blow it off as flying saucers. Or we can say it's you know, it's Joe Blow out there in Poughkeepsie who's had too much to drink. It's just, you know, it's just his fantasy.
Right. Right.
And at the meantime, it's like they are flying super sophisticated stuff that you can imagine, you know, with the exponential advance in technologies. You can just imagine what they're flying today.
So did you think that most of that technology was gotten from the Nazis with paperclip, or do you think it's a combination of that and reverse engineering craft that landed here, crashed here? What's your perspective on how the technology went from being where it was, let's just say in I'll just pick a date, the 1930s to where we are today? Because, I mean, it's a leap that is just incredible. Most people don't paying attention to it, but I always try to figure out, how did that leap take place?
I think, you know, some of it may in fact be back engineered from crashed ET vehicles. However, I don't know if you've read Roswell and the Reich by Joseph Farrell. That'll stretch your mind a little bit.
Yeah.
So much of the advanced technologies that they claim were recovered from the Roswell crash, the Germans were working on. All during World War II. There's so much technology, there's so much advanced stuff that the Germans were doing that has been very, very carefully hidden from the public. And it's like, I think a lot of this stuff, they use the ET back-engineered stuff as a diversion. They don't want the public to realize it's like how incredibly far advanced the Germans were with sophisticated. I mean, they were developing integrated circuits, computers, highly advanced metallurgy, all the kind of stuff that you thought, what you've been told was extraterrestrial, was in fact very likely originally from Germany.
Okay.
But it's not to say it's like I'm not going to say there's no such thing as extraterrestrials, because I think there are. I think that's part of the deal here. I'm not so sure, though, that since the 1980s and Ronald Reagan's Star Wars programs, is that we have developed a sufficiently sophisticated Star Wars program that the ETs themselves tend to stay away. So that most of what you are seeing now is it's either hyperdimensionals or it's our own stuff.
Okay.
And, you know, you've probably seen that clip from SDS-48.
Yeah.
Where they're shooting the laser at the flying saucer. You're led to believe that flying saucer is a threat. It's evil aliens. I said, well, my God, what if it's friendly aliens?
Right.
And it's like, well, we're damn sure we don't want any friendly aliens coming here to screw up our little program, our little fun farm we have here.
It's really it's disconcerting, actually, you know, when you think about it, when you start digging into it, and you've done a lot of digging with regard to the advancement in the technology and the systems that they have, you know, and you take a look at what they're telling the public is available. They don't say a whole lot, but what they show them is just basically you're back in first grade and what they're doing with this stuff. And you take a look at how they're running the world, and it's not to the advantage of humanity. It starts to get a little worrisome. Yeah.
And they're not doing it to the advantage of the planet itself.
Right.
Yeah, it is problematical, and you wonder, well, are we just prisoners of the military-industrial complex and the petroleum industries?
Right.
Are we their prisoners? If they have this breakaway civilization technology, you think they're going to use that to liberate the rest of us?
Well, it also calls into question those who want to debunk that there is an effort to depopulate the planet. As this technology advances, you don't need all these people, plain and simple. I hate to sound so doom and gloom, but you just have to look at the reality of the situation.
Well, that's the other dark side of transhumanism and this consciousness shift that's going on here. If the powers that be come to the conclusion that the human race is going to advance, you know, spiritually to the point where they're no use to us anymore, maybe we should just replace them all with cyborg robots.
Yeah. Now, do you give any thought or any credence to the fact that you mentioned chemtrails before, the aerosol spraying, that it potentially contains nanotechnology to contribute toward that transhumanism agenda?
Well, if you look at the people who are doing it and the technologies that they have access to, it's like, you know, put two and two together. It says, do you think they'd really spray us with this stuff? Probably. You know? It's that kind of Frankenstein mentality. So, you know, it's like when they set off the first atomic bomb in 1945, the Trinity test, it's like, wow, you know, they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know if it would blow up the whole planet. But did they do it anyway? Sure they did. So let's set it off, see what happens.
Now, you had mentioned also that the atomic bomb blasts, one of the intentions was to open portals.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's a kind of a new twist, or a twist that maybe a lot of people haven't considered.
Well, it's not something I have actual factual material about, but one of the conjectures was that if you set off an atomic bomb, it tears a hole in time and space. Mm-hmm. It's not just a big explosion, that it works on a hyperdimensional level. There is evidence that the men working on the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer and his crew, were also members of the Bohemian Grove. So these guys weren't just atomic scientists, they were occultists, they were Kabbalists. And it's like, if they understood that, yeah, we can tear a hole in space-time, and God knows what entities from other hyperdimensional realms can just pour into this reality. Let's try that too. That's a story that definitely requires deeper investigation.
Well, that
is definitely a possibility because Robert Oppenheimer was definitely fully aware of the Kabbalah, the Jewish Kabbalah, and Jewish occult magic.
Yeah. So it goes back to what we were saying before. The whole secret society, occult agenda is completely wrapped around this thing. And you had mentioned also about Dr. Greer. Dr. Greer stated that they were able to contact entities from the lower dimensions and actually bring them into a physical form in our dimension.
Yes. If you go back and listen to his interview with Carrie Cassidy, it was July 26, I think, 2009. Carrie Cassidy just really skewers him in that interview. But he is granted enough time to talk and explain this program that where he says, they can create, what does he call, PLFs, program life forms. They can genetically engineer entities that look like grays or reptilians. And then he went on to say that they had another program, I think he said Lockheed was involved with it, in an underground facility back in the South where they could access lower astral or denser astral field entities, he said, which some would call demonic, and they can actually see these beings and creatures there and bring them into three-dimensional form and materialize them into flesh and blood using special electronics. That was just an astounding statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, what? What person will be insane enough to bring a demon into this world 3D and, so it could walk around and mess around with our reality here? It's like that just is totally insane to me.
It is totally insane, and the only person that would do that would somebody that is insane.
Or somebody who is in of themselves demonic.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly
so
right.
I'm a demon, and I want to bring all my friend demons here to this reality so we can party.
Yeah.
It's like, it might be nice to ask our permission, the permission of the rest of us first before you do that.
That's like, a lot of the research that centers around Dulce and
Yes.
the bases underground there.
Yes.
And they talk a lot about those types of activities
Yes.
going on and a lot of experimentation on humans. So do you get into that at all, or it's just something that you know about?
Well, you can put two and two together. They're doing that in one facility. I've heard that from a gentleman who claimed to work underground at Area 51, and if you go down enough levels, that it's completely controlled by reptilians.
Yeah.
There's levels that are just reptilians only, which translates to demons in my book. But
Well, that's Phil Schneider too, and he was talking about his work and going underground.
yes,
Right.
yes, right. If it's underground, it's hidden. It doesn't meet. It's not in the light of day, so it's like there's all kind of ugly mischief you can hide down there
Yeah.
that the rest of us would not appreciate very much.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you take a step back, then you wonder, well, with all of this that's going on, why is it that we're all still here?
Well, obviously we serve a purpose, or we would be gone, because if they wanted to eliminate us, I think they would have done so a long time ago. So you ask yourself, well, what do humans provide to these entities that we have some value to them? So in that sense, you can go to my blog, which is Archons, the Space Invaders.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the Archons, yep.
Archons, the Archons are a hyperdimensional entity that feeds off human fear and chaos and destruction and so forth. So it's in that sense, they would want to keep us here in like a slave setting. So they always have the energy of our terror and fear and hatred and war and so forth to feed on.
Right, that's their fuel.
Your food source.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I see you have John Lash's book up. I read John's
Yes.
book. It's a great book. Yep.
Yes.
Excellent book. Well, Jim, I don't want to take up more of your time. You've been so generous, and this has been a very, very fascinating discussion.
Well, like I said, you get me started, I can just blather on for hours about this stuff. I hope I've shared some interesting things for you today.
Oh, you absolutely have, and I would love to have you come back if you wouldn't mind, and we could
sure.
talk about some more stuff. And because this gets really esoteric, and it gets a little way out there for many folks. But the purpose of my show is to get people to start thinking outside the box.
Well, I think that's important. And another thing I have been criticized of, that people, some interviewers claim that, all I do is rag about, how evil the aliens are. And it's like, I honestly believe that there are benevolent aliens out there. And I don't want to, put all of them into a box of being demons or archons or whatever. But I think the bottom line is that humans have to grow up. I really believe that the humans have the ability and have, frankly, the responsibility to wake up and reassume their proper control over this planet. And only at that time, only when that takes place, when we assume our mature responsibility on this planet, will we be fit to interact with benevolent extraterrestrials.
Right, and we are the custodians of this planet, and
Exactly.
and we have abdicated our responsibility.
Right.
Just take a look at what's going on the planet. I get the same thing. They say, "Oh, Mike, this stuff is so negative," and I'm like, "Look,
Right,
it's
right.
not negative. It's you can look at it as negative, but you also have to get your arms around reality.
Exactly.
Take a look at what's going on around you."
There are so many people out there that they just want to sit back and they just kind of accept the status quo on this, oh, I can't wait for the Space Brothers to come and rescue us. Well, I honestly do not believe they will. Why should they?
No,
I mean, if they talk about the Pleiadians. Well, the Pleiadians have been through this, and they finally learned how to assume responsibility for their own lives and their own world.
right?
And it's like, and we have not done that. So it's like, and why should the Pleiadians come and rescue us if they have done that? It's not their responsibility. It's our responsibility. We're the 7th Cavalry that needs to come and rescue the humans. The humans are the 7th Cavalry. We're the ones who need to rescue ourselves.
Well, it's the savior mentality.
Right. And it's like, until we are mature enough to fulfill that, then don't hold your breath, because the benevolent aliens, if they're worth their salt, ain't going to come here.
No, they're not. And like you said, we're responsible for
Right.
getting ourselves out of this hole.
And because we can. And this is what is so dynamic, and this is what I think the late Dr. Carla Turner stumbled onto, and why she was killed, is like, because we do have the power within us to dig ourselves out of this mess.
No, you're absolutely right, Jim. And we are the captains of this ship. And if people are just going to wait around for, like I mentioned before, a savior to show up, then the ship's going to go down.
Well, not only that, if a savior did show up, if some extraterrestrial group did, decide to be our savior, that they wouldn't be saving us. Actually, they would be setting us back thousands of years, because we have been denied, the opportunity to save ourselves.
Right.
So we would create a whole new epic of savior religions, right? And will not have, evolved to the point where we had stood up to take care of our own responsibilities.
No, that's absolutely right. We have to, like you said, we have to mature, and we have to grow into our existence, and we have to understand who we are.
Right.
And that's the thing, the whole mentality that you're going to get saved. That's a whole nother aspect of the Cabal's agenda, is to create that.
To keep people feeling stupid and helpless.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly right. So, all right, Jim. Well, I want to thank you so much, and I would love to have you come back.
My pleasure, Mike.
All righty. Bye-bye now.
Bye now.
And that concludes my interview with Jim Nichols, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Jim's website can be found at http://thewebmatrix.net/Jim Nichols UFO. The link is also in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, The Sage of Quay. Also, if you get a moment, please take a listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia, by heading over to laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.